Hi, everyone. Sorry for the technical difficulties we've experienced, and thus we're a little bit late. Whoever could not join, we will be sending over the recording of the session. For those joining us, welcome to today's session. We'll be going over insights on developer tools usage and measuring AI tools ROI. A quick intro on Slashdata, who is bringing you these findings. Slashdata is a technology-focused analyst firm exploring the broader software development space as well as the evolving AI technologies. The data we will be discussing today stems from Slashdata's biannual Omnibus Global Developer Surveys, namely as of now the latest Q1 2026 Developer Nation survey, which aside from the topics we're covering today, also deep dives into other areas such as cloud, mobile, web, games, and so on, capturing a snapshot of the broader software development ecosystem. The survey has a global reach. Leona, if you can move over to the next one. With over 12,400 valid responses from software developers in 95 countries reach. You can see the geo-distribution here. And without further ado, I would like to pass the mic to Bleona Vicai, our Principal Research Consultant and Product Strategist, Slashdata. Bleona, take it away.
Thanks, Natasha. Hi, everyone. Sorry for the delay. Thanks for joining us. So today I'll be sharing some data with you about the state of AI and development. So as we know, over the past 2 years specifically, we've really watched AI transform from a technology that developers were curious about into something that is really now embedded into everyday workflows of the majority of professional developers. But using them and quantifying their benefits are two very different things. And that's one of the things that we wanted to explore in the most recent wave of our Developer Nation survey. So I'm going to walk you through two separate research findings that paint a picture of where the developer community stands right now with AI, both in terms of what they're actually doing with these tools and also quite critically whether they can prove that these tools are working. So by the end of this webinar, you'll have three main key takeaways: a clear picture of AI adoption among professional developers, hard evidence about the measurement gap that most organizations are facing, and also an introduction to a new benchmarking product that we're launching that directly addresses the questions that technology leaders are asking about AI developer tools. So let's get started. So actually, this first report that we're teasing today, it comes from our latest Global Developer Survey, where we asked over 10,000 professional developers a straightforward question. Do you use or work with ML AI models, tools, APIs, or services? And if so, in which of the following ways? So the data gives us a clear snapshot of where the market stands right now. So as we can see, the majority of professional developers, 75%, are using AI-assisted tools in some form, and almost half, 45%, are adding AI functionality or developing AI models. Within that 75% using AI-assisted tools, there are three distinct ways that developers are engaging with AI, and they represent fundamentally different relationships with the technology. First, we have 53% of professional developers who use AI-assisted tools, using them outside the coding environment. So AI chatbots or agents, things like ChatGPT, Claude, or other LLMs that are integrated into their workflow to get answers to coding questions. So this is really lightweight, low friction adoption. So you're not building with AI, you're mainly consulting with it. And then second, 42% of these developers are using AI-assisted development tools or agents integrated into the coding environment itself. We're talking about GitHub Copilot, JetBrains AI, Amazon Q Developer, so tools that live in your IDE, that understand your code base and surface suggestions in real time. So this is a deeper level of integration because the AI is no longer just a side tool, but it's already into the development loop. And third, a quarter of developers are using AI tools to generate creative assets for projects, such as images, diagrams, documentation, or other non-code assets. So this is more niche, but it signals that AI is being used not just for code generation among developers, but for the full spectrum of what goes into shipping software. Now, 45% of developers report either adding AI functionality to their applications or developing AI models and infrastructure. And that's a different category entirely, because these developers aren't just using AI as a productivity tool, but they're actually building with it. And of course, within this group, we also see another split. We have around a third of developers adding AI functionality to their applications, either through fully managed AI services or APIs, or self-managed local AI models. So here, you're leveraging the service provider's model. You're not training or hosting your own. And it's fast, the managed part as well, it's managed, and it abstracts away a lot of infrastructure complexity. And then the remaining 26%, they represent increasingly specialist activities. So customizing pre-trained AI models, fine-tuning hyperparameters, etc. And these are the developers building the foundation that the first group of tool users depend on. And for the purposes of today's discussion, we're going to be focusing on this first largest group, developers using AI-assisted tools, because this is the group experiencing the most immediate pressure to justify their investment, the group most likely to be affected by organization-wide decisions around AI tooling, and also the group that we'll be diving deep into with our new benchmarking product, which I will talk to you about in a bit. So the 75% that are using these tools represent the market that we need to understand in detail. But before we dive into those results, I want to show how we got to this adoption level right now. So this chart tracks developer involvement with AI over the past 2 years. So from Q1 of 2024 to Q1 of 2026 now. So the story is one of consolidation at the top and migration toward more sophisticated use cases. When it comes to using AI-assisted tools, we see that this has grown from 61% in Q1 of 2024 to 75% in Q1 of 2026. That is steady, consistent growth over 2 years. The trajectory has remained consistently steep, and each quarter we actually see incremental gains. So we're not seeing the phenomenon of early adopters jumping in and then plateauing, but it's this continuous integration which tells us that these tools are actually sticky and they're solving real problems for developers. Adding AI functionality or developing AI models, again, we start seeing an incline. It started at about 32% 2 years ago and is now sitting at 45%. So again, steady upward movement. And the one thing that is declining is the share of developers saying that they don't use or they don't work with ML AI models, tools, APIs, or services at all. So 2 years ago, that was about 28% of the market, and today it's down to 12%. So the holdouts still exist, but they're clearly a shrinking minority. Which brings us to the second report and the much harder question of how do technology leaders know that this investment is actually working and it is bringing productivity gains. So AI really has long been embedded in technology organizations, either through powering search engines or recommendation algorithms, but something has shifted in the past 2 years because it's no longer a background technology, but it's really visible, it's strategic, and it's also expensive. Generative AI chatbots, coding assistants, enterprise automation tools, they have moved to the center of business planning. And as AI investment scales, then there's a new pressure emerging, this need to justify it to the board, to finance. Boards want evidence, finance teams want numbers, and also the developers who are caught in the middle, they're discovering that believing that AI works and being able to prove it are two very different things. So the second report examines how developers who are in leadership roles, or technology leaders, as we'll call them, are experiencing and evaluating AI value, how they rate what it delivers, whether they measure it, and also how rigorous or how formal those measurements are in practice. The findings come from more than 2,000 professional developers working in leadership positions, drawn from /Data's 31st Global Developer Survey. So Here, we're actually providing an overview of the headline findings today, and for a full deep dive, including breakdowns by role, by sector, by region, and also agentic AI maturity level, we prepared a more comprehensive premium report called The State of AI ROI Measurement in Software Teams. And that report will be published next month. So we'll make sure to let everyone know when it's out. So since we're now focusing only on professional developers in leadership roles, I want to set the scene by saying that 80% of them use AI-assisted tools, which is 5 percentage points higher than professional developers overall, which was in the first slide that I shared. From that group, we can see that 75% rate AI tools as valuable or extremely valuable relative to the cost and effort that is required. Now, this is a big number, so it deserves both celebration and scrutiny. On one hand, celebration, because it really reflects a genuine shift in the market. It confirms that AI tooling has indeed become core infrastructure for most software engineering organizations. And the people close to that transition, the engineering leaders, using these tools every day, they are overwhelmingly positive. 27% even describe its benefits far exceeding the cost and effort. But of course, scrutiny is warranted because confidence and evidence are not the same thing. And the broader market context makes the distinction quite urgent. For example, there's a study from S&P Global. They found that the share of companies abandoning the majority of their AI initiatives before even reaching production, it surged from 17% to 42% in a single year. So in 12 months, the abandonment rate nearly doubled. Because somewhere between the pilot and the production, the reality of the work, so the data quality challenges, the integration complexity, and the unclear ROI, they all caught up with the enthusiasm. And Gartner as well, a well-trusted source, they predicted that at least 30% of generative AI projects will be abandoned after proof of concept, citing 3 primary causes of this abandonment. One is poor data quality, then unclear business value, and the third is inadequate risk controls. So this unclear business value is the issue that we're examining and we're discussing today. When we ask technology leaders directly, do you measure the impact or ROI of the AI tools, models, or services that your teams use? 88% said yes. Of course, on the surface, that's reassuring because an overwhelming majority is actively tracking AI value, and it seems that only 12% are sort of flying blind, making decisions about expensive tools based on trial and error. But when you look past this binary of measuring versus not measuring, a much more complicated picture emerges, one that especially looks different depending on where your organization sits relative to the benchmark. So this is the story that I want to discuss a bit more. We can see that 39% of technology leaders who are measuring AI ROI are doing so through formal or automated processes. Things like regular KPI tracking, integrated dashboards, automated reporting systems. So this is really the gold standard. So your metrics are being collected continuously, they're being tracked systematically, and when you need to answer a question about AI value, the data is already ready and waiting for you. But then we have another 41% who describe their approach as defined but manual. So they have structure because they have quarterly reviews, they have internal surveys, even periodic conversations between developers and engineering leads. So there's a framework, but the framework depends on someone to trigger it. So when it's time for the quarterly review, someone organizes the conversation, someone gathers the feedback, documents the outcome. So it's rigorous in intent, but rather episodic when it comes to execution. Then we have 17% who are operating informally or ad hoc, so through occasional discussions, through subjective impressions. So there's really no consistent tracking. Basically, do you think AI is helping becomes the measurement methodology. So it's really evaluation-based and word-of-mouth based, not really KPI focused. So with this, I want to reframe that 88% headline that I spoke about before. So 88% of organizations believe they are measuring AI value, but only 39% are doing so through processes that don't require someone to initiate measuring. And if your organization sits in that manual middle, which we can see that many do, it's worth understanding what this really means on an operational level. So manual measurement, which is at 41%, it often involves structured efforts, like I said, this quarterly review or team survey, but it also carries structural weaknesses that make it a poor foundation for high stakes investment decisions like AI tooling is. First, it is vulnerable to deprioritization. So when delivery pressure rises, when you're shipping a critical feature or you're fighting a production issue, the quarterly AI review is often the first thing that slips. Measurement cadence breaks down precisely when it's most needed, so during periods of change or uncertainty, and that's when the organization is deciding whether to double down on AI or pull back, and that's when the data goes silent. Second, it is also really susceptible to recency bias. So informal and periodic processes tend to weigh the most recent and the most visible interactions disproportionately. So a high profile failure shortly before a review, like a hallucination in an AI suggestion, it shapes the assessment more than months of quiet incremental productivity gains that were never explicitly tracked. So this is a shortcoming. And then third, about the manual reviews, it rarely produces the evidence that finance teams find convincing. We've been running a lot of interviews with software engineering leaders talking about the future of developer teams and really understanding how the process of ROI measurement is happening within teams. And we really find that that is something that is lacking in terms of formality, in terms of actual numbers and longitudinal data. And that is something that the pressure from the above, the pressure from the board keeps increasing. So it's really paramount that teams are able to provide that data. Gardner noted that a major challenge for organizations is justifying substantial AI investment for productivity enhancement, which can be difficult to translate directly into financial benefits. Because, of course, also historically, CFOs have not been comfortable investing in indirect future value, because without longitudinal data connected to business outcomes, that investment is nearly impossible. Among the teams with no measurement in place, 59%, as we can see, rate AI as valuable, and 13% rate it as not valuable. But then looking at teams that are measuring in some form, 78% rated as valuable compared to 4% finding it not valuable. So the difference between non-measurers and measurers is a 19 percentage point gap in perceived value. And when we isolate teams measuring formally, those with automated processes, like I explained before, the figure rises even further to 85% rating AI as valuable. So really the gap is huge. And now, of course, the intuitive explanation is straightforward. Measurement captures value. So teams that track metrics, they're able to see what AI is actually delivering. So then they rate it more highly. But there might be something deeper happening. So we pose another hypothesis that actually measurement doesn't just capture value, but it helps create it. Because think about when teams are tracking metrics consistently, they also use AI tools more deliberately. They start routing tasks toward AI where it demonstrably helps and avoiding it where it doesn't. So they start to develop better practices. They correct for that asymmetry that I mentioned before, the recency bias, so the spectacular failure that sticks in memory versus the hundreds of routine successes that don't. Systematic training also creates feedback loops. So you measure, you see what's working, you adjust, and then you measure again. So the process, with iteration, it gets tighter and the value increases. So measurement doesn't just answer the question, is AI working, but it also changes the behavior of the team in ways that make the answer more likely to be yes. And we also find that the clearest organizational size-related divide in our data set sits at the informal end of the measurement spectrum, as we can see. So among freelancers and organizations with up to 100 employees, 25% rely on occasional discussions and subjective impressions. So that's our informal category. And that's more than double the rate of enterprises with more than 1,000 employees, and notably higher than mid-sized firms. The flip is true at the formal end. 46% of enterprises have KPI tracking, they have dashboards or automated monitoring in place, compared to 41% of mid-sized firms and only 30% of smaller organizations. So that's a 16-point gap between the smallest and the largest organizations. Also, we see that every organization type has landed in the manual middle, in roughly equal proportion, so regardless of resources or of scale. And that consistency tells us that this manual tier doesn't function as a stepping stone towards formal measurement, but it's more like a default state that organizations settle into and tend to stay in. So it's comfortable enough that you stop pushing to evolve it. So what this means practically, for smaller organizations, the practical priority is not building some sort of dashboard infrastructure from scratch, but it's escaping this informal tier entirely. So moving from ad hoc impressions to even one defined manual process, it closes the most consequential gap in the data, and it's also likely within reach without needing significant tooling investment. For mid-sized organizations who are already in the manual tier, the 11-point formal measurement gap relative to enterprises is the number that is worth closing because it really connects directly to the value perception gap between those groups. So if that gap is closed, then you're not just improving your measurement process, but you're likely also improving how your seniors perceive the value of AI investment. So what this all means for technology leaders. So as we're all aware now, the question is no longer whether to adopt AI. The question is really whether organizations have built the internal capabilities to know what that adoption is actually worth. So the data suggests that most have not done it in a formal way, so in a way that makes a real difference. And the gap between claiming to measure and measuring formally and rigorously is wide, and it carries real consequences. For the quality of evidence available to senior leaders, so when your board or your CFO asks, is this AI investment paying off? The answer depends almost entirely on whether you have the systematic data or the quarterly impressions for the informal part. When we see a lot of sources talking about AI initiatives being abandoned and that starts affecting your industry, then your board will likely also have even harder questions. And this is where the organizations that have measurement frameworks in place will have the answers and others will be scrambling. And then without systematic tracking, you can't really tell whether Copilot is saving you more time than Q developer, whether your investment in an agentic AI platform is actually reducing toil, or whether you're just basically paying for a shiny tool that nobody is using effectively or to its full potential. So really the key is that knowing how your measurement practices compare to the market is the starting point to building that capability. Now, we've been listening to these questions from the market about which tools are actually delivering, what's worth the investment, how they're being used, what's driving adoption, and way more questions. And we've developed something that is a direct response to that. So we've recently introduced the AI Developer Tool Benchmark, and this is a new research product specifically designed to give technology leaders the data that they need to make informed decisions about AI developer tooling. So whether you're a vendor building and selling AI products or a buyer looking to choose the right tool for the team or for your products, this data will likely be very useful for you. We actually launched a pilot version in Q4 of last year to sort of pressure test the product in the market, and we gathered extensive feedback from a lot of our clients. So now within April, so very soon, we'll be launching the official first benchmark with more than 2,400 professional developers worldwide. Briefly, I will tell you about what the benchmark covers. So first, it's an overview of 20 AI developer tools scored on adoption, usage intensity, CSAT, so satisfaction, among 2,400 professional developers. So we're not just asking, are you using Copilot? We're asking, how frequently are you using it? How satisfied you are with it, and how it compares to alternatives in the same space. Second, how developers actually work. So do you use a single tool, or do you stack multiple tools together? How do you make tooling decisions? What's driving preference? And this actually matters because in the real world, we find that most teams aren't using one tool in isolation. So there's plenty of opportunity for different tools to penetrate or replace current tooling. Third, task priorities and satisfaction. Developers have different tasks. They have different workflows, different pain points, and we measure which tasks developers prioritize the most when it comes to using AI tools. Things like code generation, debugging, documentation, and then which tools are actually solving these problems at scale. Fourth, we have cost and pricing evaluation. So the tool landscape is quite crowded, and pricing models vary wildly per seat, per token, enterprise negotiation. So we measure how developers perceive value relative to cost. Then we have decision drivers and trust perceptions. What actually moves a developer from using one tool to another? Is it performance? Is it ease of integration? Is it trust in the company? So we map all of these decision drivers that matter to developers. Sixth, we have productivity and measurable impact. Importantly, because this ties directly back to our ROI reports, we measure claims about productivity. So developers tell us whether they perceive AI tools as making them more productive in the sense of saving time for them. And so they quantify the impact. And this is the bridge between adoption and value realization. And last but not least, every wave, we're looking to change a deep dive section based on the feedback that we get from our clients and the interest out there and things moving in the market. So this time we decided to focus on AI agents, mainly the agentic form of the AI coding tools that we're asking about. So this is fundamentally different from using them as simply coding assistants. We've built this dedicated session to understand how teams are experimenting with agents, the level of autonomy that they're providing to these agents, what blockers they're hitting, and where they see opportunity. As I said, we'll be publishing the full benchmark next month. So for anyone interested in this webinar today, we'll also keep you posted on this. I know we've covered a lot of ground today, so thank you a lot for your time. And again, apologies for being late. I'll open the floor to any questions or comments that you might have. Thank you.
Hey, Bleona, there's one question that was shared with us, which is, you mentioned that 42% of companies are abandoning AI initiatives, but 80% of tech leaders say that AI is valuable. That seems contradictory. Are the leaders saying it's valuable, the same ones whose companies are abandoning initiatives? Or is there a different group of people making those decisions?
Okay, yeah, thanks for the question. So just to confirm first that the 42% abandoning is coming from an external source and the 80% is coming from ours, but it's a very sharp observation and it gets at something quite important because the 80% that we're seeing, so those are engineering leaders and developers who are using AI tools and finding them valuable in their day-to-day work. The 42% abandonment rate that S&P Global is tracking, it's different because that is projects that got greenlit at the board or the executive level, which is often broader AI transformation initiatives, not just developer tools. So you can have engineering leaders genuinely finding Copilot valuable while their company's enterprise, the AI data pipeline project, something that is much larger and much more complex, it might get abandoned because the data quality wasn't there or the business case fell apart during implementation. So it's a reminder that developer level adoption and enterprise level success are really two different problems. And that is exactly why measurement matters, again, to my point, because if you're only measuring at the team level, like my engineers like this tool, you're missing that executive or strategic question of, is this solving a business problem at scale? And that's where the abandoned projects struggle.
Okay, thank you. Another question that came in says, you talked about how manual measurement is vulnerable to deprioritization and recency bias, but doesn't the act of doing a quarterly review, even if it's manual and imperfect, create accountability? Isn't that better than nothing?
Yeah, thanks for the question. You're absolutely right. And I want to be clear that manual measurement is genuinely better than nothing. That quarterly review does indeed create accountability internally. The problem isn't that it exists, but it's what you can't see with it and where the gap between the manual and the formal process lies. So here, that's the hidden cost. When you're doing quarterly reviews, you're sort of solving for the wrong problem because you're documenting past impressions. But what you actually need is the real-time signal about what's working, what isn't. So more up-to-date data that you can adjust now and not in 3 months when the next quarterly review comes in. Because I think this is where it gets more expensive, because teams in the manual tier often end up doing the measurement work twice, because they do the quarterly review, they report what they find, and then when the CFO asks follow-up questions 3 months later, they sort of scramble to do a special investigation because then the data from the quarterly review wasn't structured in a way that answers these new questions that have arisen. So formal measurement systems are expensive upfront, but I think they answer both the questions that you knew you'd have and the ones that you didn't. So that's the leverage and potential worth of the cost, in my opinion. Hope that answers the question.
Okay, great. Thank you. Shall we wait for a minute for any other questions?
Yeah. If there's nothing coming in, I just wanted to take the opportunity to say, I mentioned it before, that we're continuously talking with engineering leaders about the future of development teams in the age of AI. So it's a very relevant actual topic that a lot of people are interested in. And we're really intending to run quant surveys and really supplement it with these very rich interviews that we're having to deliver research. So if anyone here is interested and has something to say on the topic, we'd love to have a short conversation with you whenever you're available. You can reach out to me directly via the email that you see here on the slides. So just wanted to take the opportunity to say that.
Great, Blayona, thank you. We have a couple of questions that came in. One saying, how is value typically measured in organizations?
Okay, how is value measured in organizations? Well, this is something that we're trying to get the answer to through qual interviews, because this is something that when we ask developers, for example, in our AI developer tool benchmark study, we're typically asking them to tell us about the time saved, for example, or PR merged, so things that are a bit easier to quantify for developers and things that people are measuring through KPIs. But value is very subjective. So I think from the discussions that we've been having with software engineering leaders, many of them are trying to fit in the subjective, the human factor in there. So really trying to see how developers themselves are perceiving the help that they're receiving from these AI developer tools, not in the sense of the productivity when it comes to their work, but really how they feel about them potentially replacing their roles. So it's something really that might trigger that psychological safety that we keep hearing about in these interviews as well. So it's something that is being interpreted differently, I think, from different organizations. So I don't have one exact answer right now, but it's something that we're exploring through the Future of Developer Teams interviews and hoping to get enough data to get both the quantitative and the qualitative sides so we can share with you once we have it.
Excellent, thank you. And then there's a related question. Have you run any casual impact studies for measuring impact of AI on coding productivity?
Yes, so I believe I sort of answered the question a little bit. That is what we're trying to get with the AI Developer Tools benchmark, and that is a quarterly product that we keep trying to improve. So if at any point someone is interested in something that the benchmark itself doesn't carry right now in this quarter, we were able to add questions to other quarters and make it a rich product. But I think in terms of trust and performance related metrics, we're able to have an answer about the AI developer tools, the 20 tools that we're measuring.
Wonderful. And I think we're at time. So if any other questions arise, please do feel free to reach out to us, as Leona mentioned, via her email address or /data.co directly, or me, Natasha, at /data.co. And we will try to get back to you as soon as possible. You will also be receiving the recording of this session and the report when it's ready in your inbox. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.